As a Sikh person living in a diaspora, what people perceive us as.
If you're talking about North America, a lot of people don't know who we are. Living in the diaspora, it's a blessing of its own. But at the same time, there are some challenges when it comes to my field. When it comes to our representation, there's not enough people talking about what we're missing because of previous stereotypes that are already there.
ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਹੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਬਾਰੇ as Sikh?
My perspective is more about learning every day. That's what we do. As a Sikh, you're always learning.
What we see through movies, it's completely different than what our grandparents have perceived. They have looked through it.
Our perception in Bollywood from day one has been comedy, or we have been like the jokers. They're making fun of us all the time.
I just feel sad to talk about what Sikhs are going through in India with the movement of Khalistan. If you see any Sikh on the streets, people will call them Khalistani.
A lot of times, the perception is built through media. It is just sticking around the way it is.
How do you think a Sikh person perceives towards another Sikh person? Kuwarjeet, Sat Shri Akal, welcome to our show. We are pleased to have you here. I know we had planned early on to bring you on the show because a lot of stuff going on in both of our lives. We got a chance to sit down and discuss about today's topic. So how are you doing today?
I'm good, and I'm really happy to be here, and it's finally
It's
happening.
finally
So I'm really excited.
absolutely. So before we go deep into the dark side of what we're gonna talk today, let's start with a little light side, right? As a Sikh person living in a diaspora, how do you think what people perceive us as?
That's a really complex question because it really depends who you're talking about. ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿਹਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, who are we talking about in general? Um, especially if you're talking about North America. Sometimes what happens is a lot of people don't know our identity. A lot of people don't know who we are. And I've been in rooms where I'm like the only guy who's a Sikh or like a brown person. And what happens is a lot of times people are curious. They want to know more, but they're afraid to ask. And there's a lot of you could call it like more of like a awareness thing. We still need that, even though like we're the fifth largest religion out there. Living in the diaspora, it's a blessing of its own. But at the same time, there are some challenges when it comes to my field in general. So when we talk about, let's say, I'll give you a really good example. When I started J school, when I started journalism school, or even like we're talking about Brampton, Toronto here, and these kind of scenarios are happening here. I don't know like how it's gonna be. It's probably worse outside of these cities too. So I started J school back in 2019. When I went into J school, I found out I'm the only Punjabi, I'm the only Sikh in the whole class. And on the graduating day, it was the same thing. I was the only turban dude walking down that stage. And in general, when we talk about the diaspora, it is expanding, but at the same time, when it comes to our representation, there's not enough people talking about what we're missing because of previous stereotypes that are already there. But at the same time, when you talk about living in the diaspora and how people perceive us, that's a total different topic that you talk about because different community perceive us differently. And they have their own internal neutral biases. And if going forward, there's also some other. It really depends if you're talking about specific demographics, because a lot of times what happens is, let's say it's a white person who's trying to talk to me. It's a total different conversation talking to a white person or a brown person or like a black person. Because with the black community, there's a lot of things that we could connect to. Or with the indigenous community, there's a lot of things that we could connect to with them. With a white person, because they have so much privileges, it's hard for them to understand our point of view.
Okay, so you've given the perspective of how people think and perceive you from the lens of, other communities and people, right? But for you, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀ
Yeah.
ਸੋਚਦੇ ਹੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਬਾਰੇ as a Sikh identity? Because each individual is different, right?
My perspective is more about learning every day, and well, that's what Sikh teaches us. Sikh literally means learner. Okay, but that's what we do as a Sikh. You're always learning. But there are a few things in my childhood too. Like day one, to मैं हैगा ऐदा कि I try to stay तैयार पर तैयार. So it doesn't matter whenever a situation comes up, I'm ready to face that situation. And I perceive myself as a good person. And also, when talking about me and my connection with Sikhi, it goes back to where I was born. I was born in Punjab, Chandigarh, and a big part of that is also me living with my grandparents and my grandparents telling me Sakhis, and that's what has been connecting me to Sikhi a lot and learning more about the history and stay connected by listening to Kirtan, doing part, and things like that.
When you think about your childhood, right? Your connection to your roots, to Punjab, what comes in your mind?
When it comes to like Punjab and looking at what my childhood specifically, I think very first thing is Darbar Sahib, the Golden Temple, because I have a special connection with Darbar Sahib because in childhood, well, like you had like a big craze of watching TV as a kid, especially living in India. So whenever there was like it still happens like in the afternoon or the evening, there's like live kirtan coming on the TV, and then you're just listening to kirtan or you're just watching TV, and then you see their barsa. So that's like the very first thing. But at the same time, there's also food
Absolutely.
that comes
Oh
to
yeah,
mind.
you can't beat Punjab's
You can't
food.
beat that, right?
You just can't beat.
Yeah, and there's no way that food could come to Canada. The taste could come to Canada, right?
Absolutely.
And there's also specific reasons for that if you want to learn about that.
No, we.
But those were the two things. But at the same time, also my grandparents, because I've been living here as a kid and I didn't have enough time going back and forth. Like they came to me a few times too. Um, but that's also one thing because I'm from Chandigarh, India, and going back to my childhood home, I went last year, and it was a surprise how things have changed
Oh
now,
yeah,
and
big
how
time.
it's it's like I grown, but like things have also grown with me. But I realized that when I went back to
Yeah,
India,
and I think one like what you said about having your grandparents with you. I think it's a blessing because you know. So I'm from Punjab, right? I'm from Amritsar, Punjab. Like literally, like I was born in Amritsar, and I used to go to Golden Temple like on weekly basis, like every Sunday ho gaya, every bi-weekly every Sunday ho gaya se jande sege. And then we moved here, with the whole family. My grandmother, she came along over here too, and I think that's the biggest blessing because when you get connected to your roots through your elders, through your grandparents, right? You kind of sense that, okay, this was a real thing back in the days, right? Now we have left that behind. What we see through movies, what we see now, it's completely different than what our grandparents have perceived. They have like looked through it. I remember my dadima, she used to tell me stories like how they used to like drink lassis in like this big of a jar, Like that's Punjab for you. Like they used to drink like this big lassis, and their like parents used to tell them, okay, you have to be like a little strong, and you have to have your diet. And that's the real culture that was there. That's there, and I'm waiting to go back and then have that feeling again. So I don't know how different. I'm completely sure everything's like different, digitalized and everything. So let's see. I'm waiting how that feeling will comes in.
Yeah, I also connect with that a lot because if you think about our roots or where we come from, I think it's vanishing slowly and it's slowly disappearing. And there's a whole thing that we could talk about how film industry, you talked about films and how we portrayed in films. We were not authentically actually portrayed in films. And there's a whole reasoning behind it too, because they want a lot of times people don't want they didn't want like if you okay, I'll give you a really good example. Let's talk about Bollywood, for example.
Yeah,
Our perception in Bollywood from day one has been comedy, or we have been like the jokers,
Santa Banta jokes.
with like Santa Banta jokes, or the movie Sardarji, or like things like that, right? Son of Sardar. They're making fun of us all the time, and not showing the good side of, like, not showing what the true Punjab is in general. So, like you talked about, like the big glass of lassi, that's not being portrayed properly. Like I've seen some representation now when it comes to like the movie Mastane, for example.
Right.
There was a little bit of representation. Yeah.
No, I agree and disagree with you at the same point. The reason I'm saying this because is I'll take you back to I think year before 2008, 2007, right? And I think in 2007, 2008, the movie came in called Singh is King. Akshay Kumar the movie Singh, right? And before that, Sikhs were portrayed as people who are just there in Bollywood movies, like drivers, like perceived as like not educated, like pind de bande, and also the fact that we are here just for the comedy, just for the jokes. And all I'm trying to say is like after Singh is King, Akshay Kumar tried to change the perspective of how Sikhs are perceived in Bollywood movies, and from that perspective, and I think we have grown to see the perception of Singhs as warrior. And like I saw Animal movie yesterday, right? And from that perspective, I realized, like you said, Singhs, are like our warrior community, like Sikhs are the warrior community. And I have seen that perspective from the Animal movie. And not how we've perceived as Sikhs, but they also gave tone to how the pug should be look like. They give very clear perception of how look of a Sikh should perceive like, a Sikh man should perceive like, Sikh woman should perceive like. And they give very detailed perception of that. Pug nowadays in the movies you see pug is very clear, दाढ़ी बनी हुई है सब अच्छे तरीके नाल perceive करते हैं, and I think we are breaking the barrier of that. uh, Punjabi movies, let's talk about Bollywood. Punjabi movies, the aspect, I think we're changing a lot. The content that is bringing in regional areas, especially in Bollywood, it's great. Diljit Dosanjh, he has taken Sikh community to a huge another level. And I think one of the interview I read about him, he was saying that when he was entering into Bollywood, people were saying him you should like make movies without the pug, and he was like, pug is my crown. I'm not going to do anything without it. If you want to keep me in Bollywood, it's good. If not, then I'm okay with that. I'm not going to remove my pug. And I think he also has made the biggest impact in Sikh community in in an industrial way.
Yep. I agree with Diljit Dosanjh and some of the movies being really good. But my initial thoughts when it comes to representation or just talking about films, I was like, why did it take them so long?
Yeah.
Why didn't this thing happen before? And that's where I've been thinking, like, wait, it's happening now. Like, makes sense. It's happening now. But what happened to like the past like 6 or 7 or 8 years? Why didn't it happen then? And it's also because of a lot of the awareness that came through media that has changed things or the perception of who we are today. Even in India, and that has brought what's happening now.
I just feel sad to talk about what, Sikhs are going through in India, especially with the movement of Khalistan. Now, I'm not portraying this podcast as a political podcast, and I don't want to go there also. And I'm not saying I'm pro or against Khalistan. You know, I'm just saying the fact that like it's so sad to see how every Sikh is portrayed as Khalistan. I just did a podcast with one of my guests, and he said that if you see like any Sikh on the streets, people will call them Khalistani. Like our portrayal of Sikhs in India is like it's very bad.
Yeah, and that perception also came through the whole Khalistan movement and what's happening with Canada-India affairs right now. And I am also really neutral on the whole topic because I don't want to take one side. And that's a one hard thing being a journalist because you have to report and you have to stay neutral on both grounds. And in general too, like even like if you ask my opinion, I'm neutral about it because I have mixed feelings about the whole situation. But one biggest thing I do agree a lot of times what happens is if you're just walking down the street and if you have a turban on, especially in India, you'll be perceived as a Khalistani. And it's not like it's more happening to the people who wear a damala.
Why is that?
And that's also a fact because they perceive to be more like into the whole moment. And that's what India is trying to portray too. And a lot of the Indian media also try to portray that. But at the same time, it's also the whole movement. If you think about it, I still know if it's complicated in its own way, where a lot of times the perception is built through media, and it is just sticking around the way it is. You know what I mean?
I think that's the one of the big things that has impacted Sikh community is the media. Um,
Yeah.
I think once the media portrays them as a neutral people, right? In every community you see there's good and bad, right? But then you portraying
Yep.
only the bad part of it, the only the bad aspect of it's just giving the false information to the country itself, the people of the country itself. And I think that is a very wrong and it shouldn't be like that.
And I think that's one challenge I could talk about right now. There's no media outlet out there that's neutral. Because if you look at the funding that media gets from the government, for example, or from other spots, they're never neutral. They always have agenda, and they all say. And if you think about the media in general, like mainstream media, it's a business of its own. They want to run that business, and wherever they get the money, they will follow the money over the story for sometimes. And that's the perception how things works in the media nowadays.
And how do you find a truth then?
Like who like how like let's say the mainstream media talking about the whole Sikhs issue, like the India Pakistan the Khalistan issue right now, but why weren't they talking about like 5 years ago or like 3 years ago about this?
Yeah.
Because there's some current affairs happening right now. Currently something happened, that's why they're talking about it, and it is trending on their sites. They're getting a lot of clicks on it. That's why they're talking about it. And same thing goes with the whole Ukraine Russia issue. The only reason it's getting a lot of coverage is because they're getting a lot of demand for the topic to be covered. And then you could just compare it back to like Afghanistan, how that only got like 2 days or 3 days or a week of coverage here in Canada because nobody cares about it that much. It's not like nobody cares about it in Canada. It was like it didn't have that high of a clickbait or that high of clicks or that high of interest for the media to cover.
And as usual, the regular person suffers the pain of it.
I know like North America in general, we are like a melting pot and we have like a multicultural communities. But at the same time, if you look at the supervising roles of the media organizations out there, it's all white men or like it's all white people for the most part. We don't have a community representative from each of the communities there that could explain them what's happening. And that's a big reason why the false information is out there.
And is that why you wanted to come to journalism?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons. But at the same time, high school, I've enjoyed doing photography. I've been enjoying doing media things, um, talking about a lot of the issues that are not being covered. We had some organizations, like Sikh organizations here, um, who needed coverage, but at the same time, mainstream media was not covering them until like recently now. So those kind of stories not being covered was one of the reasons, but at the same time, me being a Sikh doesn't stop me from covering other communities, you know? Um, I I also want to cover other current affairs. So when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening, I want to cover that. I don't want to stop just representing my community. I want to kind of represent all the marginalized communities or the minorities. And that's where the complication comes in because how unique my unique my perspective is or unique my writing is. A lot of times, if you go into media, being from a specific background, you are a diversity hire either, or you're just made for covering that specific community. You don't have the open option of covering other communities. You know what I mean?
And you feel like that pressure.
And that's also a big issue nowadays. Yeah, and that happens every day. Like sometimes I pitch a story about something else, like out of the community, and my editor's like, "Nope, that's not happening."
Is there an instance that happened to you that you found a story and then you wanted to cover that out, or you wanted to bring that out, but for some reason you were told not to because of your identity?
A lot of times that happen.
Do you want to give some of the examples?
I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example, but I'm not taking the name of the media organization. I don't want to get in
Yeah.
trouble. But once I was covering a story, I wanted to cover a story. City Hall was passing a new legislation on like it was like the Black Lives Matter movement, and they were trying to do like a statement about it. And I wanted to cover that as a story. And when I went up to my editor, they just rejected me on the spot because they were like, "You're not the best person to do the story. You would rather send a black person to do that story."
Really?
So I was just like, okay, wait, what? Why can't I cover whatever I want to write about, right? Uh, but at the same time, it's the whole media strategy that they were trying to play. Because it's not only that one person working there, you know, who has to cover everything. It's a team effort, but at the same time, it also depends on the specific scenarios, like the one I talked about.
In general speaking, right? How do you think we perceive each other? Like, how does a sick person perceive towards another sick person? Like, how do you, like, in
Okay.
that way, like, have we done justice for our people?
That's also like a yes and no answer. In a way, it's like more neutral in the sense like I see there's a lot of people who are respectful of each other, what the background they're coming from. Uh, let's say because that's also a complex thing that you have to break down, right? There's also Punjabis who are Hindus or Muslims, but they're like Punjabis. But at the same time, there's also Sikhs who are
Hmm.
Punjabis, and then there's like Sikhs who are Sikhs. So there's a lot of like miscommunication that way, and a lot of times people perceive or assume that they belong to that one specific thing. Um, I'll give you a really good example. Let's say talking about we're in North America, you're in the US, I'm in
Right.
Canada. Whenever we see international students coming to our country, a lot of times our community have a bad perception about them because they feel like they don't know enough.
That like a
Um,
cultural
like
gap.
they're not on the level. Yeah, there's a personal gap where like there's that perception, oh, I'm more Canadian than that international student,
Mm.
or you're more American than that international student,
I've
right?
seen this a lot. Yeah,
And it's not like you were not an immigrant before or we were not immigrants before. We have that commonality, like we
immigrants.
are all
Yeah,
immigrants, but it's like it's been some time for us, but they're just new right there. Like they just came here. Except for helping them, we're presuming that oh they won't be able to learn.
yeah. I think yeah, that's the one thing that really bothers me as a community is that we're hating on each other. Like Guru Gobind Singh ji ਨੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਸਜਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਜਦੋਂ ਪੰਜ ਪਿਆਰੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸੱਜੇ
Hanji.
ਸੀਗੇ he came to the perspective of okay, like we're not Jats, we're not Khatris, or we're not like some other like caste or something. उन्होंने कहा सीगा we serve each other as like one whole community as one, and like we still haven't like we see perceive ourselves as Sikhs. We talk like we're Sikhs. We go through. I mean, sorry. I mean, we perceive ourselves as Sikh, and we say that okay, see Guru Gobind Singh Ji the lessons to mande, but no, you're not doing anything, any of it. You're completely like doing the opposite of what he has taught you. Judge karna ek dusre wal, ਦੂਸਰੇ ਦੀ ਜਿੱਥੋਂ ਬਿਲੋਂਗ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਜੱਜ ਕਰਨਾ the way they've brought up in a different like culture, different like environment, like we hate on each other and it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that because if you go into olden times, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, um, he also accepted
Yeah,
untouchables, जो पुराने ज़माने च होंदे नहीं सीगे, or the lower caste to be a human being too. And ਅੱਜ ਵੀ that's still going on. We still assume ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਾਤ ਪਾਤ or ਸਾਡਾ surname is different, we were able to do that. I think a big issue you could also think about or talk about in this whole scenario is also the language differences.
mm,
अगर मैंने ज़्यादा इंग्लिश आती है मेरे ज़्यादा पंजाबी आती है और मैंने कोई ज़्यादा लैंग्वेजेस आती हैं, I'm better than the next person out there. Or there's also like, I think a big part of it's also like ego that a lot of people have, and that also comes with the money or
yeah,
the
status, yeah.
status they have gained.
And they hate on people who speak Punjabi like the mother tongue, like I'm like
Yeah, and that also still exists. Yeah,
bro, like that's like you say that okay, you speak English in an immigrant country, like you're perceived as like educated and a nice person, but then when you speak your own like Tate Punjabi, you're perceived like okay, they're the pind to aaya. That's a very wrong
I'll
perception
give
of
you.
this. It's a messed up mentality.
I think you will also agree. You will also agree to this. You've also seen a lot of the Punjabi people trying to whitewash their name, going from Virender to Bobby,
Oh
or
yeah,
like
it's
Virender to Joe, and it's the funniest thing ever. I'm just looking at them like, wait, how's this guy Joe Buller? And then I'm just like, wait, what happened? So I always go up to them and ask them like, how did that happen? Why can't you just say what your actual name is, right? Your name that you're supposed to keep from the last alphabet of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, right? When you take the Hukamnama, and that's how the names are
Yeah.
kept too, right? And a lot of times I have people like who have butchered my name, but I always tell them to like say
How
it.
did say it? How did pronounce their name as?
Like they say like Kuwarjeet or like they whitewash it like really hard, and then I'm just like looking at them. But it's not even
It's
their
not.
fault,
Yeah.
right? That's how they are brought up too. And in response, a lot of times, like if it's a person's like Kevin or something, I would try to mess up their name
Mm,
so they understand like the pain of not getting their name right. But sometimes a lot of people don't care
yeah.
too. So
Yeah. That's like, that's where I go towards. Like, it's really important to have grandparents around you because they will teach you what's Sikhi, you should connect to Sikhi, and also the fact that the young parents in our generation, like they need to embrace their culture, their identity, so that they can pass it on to their kids. And you shouldn't be
yeah,
ashamed of, you know, you're born into a Sikh family. We should be really proud of that. Guru Gobind Singh ji ने अपना सारा सरबंस वार दिता सीगा, not just because of the way how we should look, but the way of what he fought for is having our own community, having for what is right, standing up for your own rights. And if you're just giving up like
yeah.
that, how are you gonna teach your next generation?
And it's also a big part of it's also social status too. Um, Basically perceiving everyone as equal. It's hard for some people after they have gained some sort of advantage over that person. And a lot of times I've also seen like the community inside the community, there's people who are not willing to help, even though they are supposed to. Um, and that's also a big reason behind us each hating each other, because they're also trying to play along living in a society that's not India, right? So if someone who is in Canada, they try to whitewash themselves as much as possible to blend in. But Apaki, why are you trying to blend in? We're like born to stand
Yeah,
out from the crowd. So why are we even trying
yeah.
to do that, right? And that's what something like that just I'm always like scratching my head like kyo
That's
ho
the
raha?
one thing my mom has always taught, us, like me and my siblings, is the fact that to always stand out. She gives the example of, ਜੇ ਇੱਕ ਲਾਈਨ ਵੱਜ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਲੋਕੀ ਦਾ ਲਾਈਨ ਬਣਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ, ਜੇ ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦਾ ਵੀ ਕਾਂਟਾ ਮਾਰੇਗਾ, that's a new perspective that you're gonna look at. Cross banega, right? That you have to decide if you want to be a follower or the person who brings a change, or view the world in a different way and then stand up for your own rights. And I've
Yeah.
always
And
believed that, okay, like I've always remember my mom's wordings, and I'm like, okay, I shouldn't be a person like a follower. It should always be what I perceive my thoughts and my perception and my identity as. Because if you're gonna give up your identity, how else people gonna respect you, or the fact that you have your own thing, your own identity?
that's what I like about journalism. I have the power to challenge those thoughts. I have the power to challenge the politician who's doing wrong. I have the power to the stakeholders or the people who are doing something to ask them questions. Why are you doing this? And how would this help anyone who looks like me or anyone who's in the minority community? And that's where my motivation also comes in too, because you have the power of writing something that other people are gonna look at and be like, wait, why didn't we think about this before? And why this thing is not happening from before? Why is it happening now?
Yeah.
Why didn't this happen before? And opposing, it's always difficult to deal with opposing
Right.
views, where some of the people in the community believe, oh, this is right, and then some of the people in the community believe in this right. Well, if both of them are right, just talk about what is the most common or sensible thing to do.
Any last thoughts that you'd like to give to our audience?
I think we are changing our perceptions through a lot of the stories that are coming in mainstream media. But at the same time, you also have to look at the critical lens of what's
Mm,
happening. Um, and with the AI involving right now, that's a big thing. I don't know if you have known, like with the Taliban and Israel, or like the India
yeah.
Canada thing, there is a um, there is a rise of hate against Sikhs. Um, but it's also because of the perception that Sikhs are Muslims,
Yeah, I actually,
and a lot of times people don't have that awareness
yeah,
too.
I was
So
actually reading an article that says that FBI reported, 6 over here in the US that have more hate crimes happening over here.
I've read the report too. That's why I know, and it's even worse. Even the earlier days during the pandemic, too, it was crazy. I wrote a feature story, and if you look at the numbers, they don't have the exact numbers.
Mm,
That's the funniest thing. They don't have the exact numbers, but when you actually go talk to the community themselves, there's a lot of people who have been affected by it, but they don't know it's hate crime because there's no actual laws in Canada that specify what a hate crime is. They're just provisions that are given on top of, like, for example, if somebody committed like a first degree
mm,
murder, this is a provision on top of that's put like, oh, that was a hate crime and a first degree murder. It's not like they did it and then it was like, oh, hate crime, that's it.
mm,
So there's a whole complexity inside the system, inside the whole system, where even verbally harassing someone about their identity is a type of hate crime, if you ask the experts. But if you look at the police like charts for everything, that's not a
mm.
thing. So that's the complexity. And a big part of it is also language barriers. People who come from back home, from India, they're scared of the police. They don't want to go up to the police and talk to the police. And a lot of times what happens is because the elderlies who have been assaulted or like had like some sort of hate happen to them, they had no idea that hate crime happened with them. They're just going on with their daily lives
Mm,
because they don't see the option of going to the police and ask for help. And a big part of it's also language barriers because elderly, like a lot of times they don't speak English, and a lot of times like their sons or daughters, like their children, are not willing to take that step to get more attention because they're already trying to survive themselves. And that's what study has shown when I did my interview.
well, we hope for the best that, from this podcast, people are aware, people get to know what's going on. And one message that I would like to bring is the fact that you shouldn't treat each other as a separate like community. Yes, there's Hindus, there's Sikhs, there are Christians, but you should respect each other's identity and the fact that treat each other as one human. We all bleed one same red color blood. We all bleed same color. You shouldn't like treat each other as a different perspective or a different person, and respect what they believe.